Welcome to the Touching into Presence podcast.
This podcast is for people who are interested in bodywork, empowerment, and somatic-based practices.
I am Nikki Olson.
I'm Andrew Rosenstock.
We are certified Rolfers.
Collectively, we're trained in various movement and bodywork therapies with an emphasis on somatic awareness and client resilience.
Through conversations, our goal is to share and explore mind-body paradigms to offer empowerment possibilities.
We're grateful to be in conversation with Dr. Emily Splichal. Dr. Emily, functional podiatrist and human movement specialist, is the founder of EBFA Global, formerly Evidence-Based Fitness Academy, creator of the Barefoot Training Specialist Certification, author of Barefoot Strong, and the inventor of Naboso barefoot technology. With over 19 years in the fitness industry, Dr. Splichal has dedicated her medical career towards studying postural alignment and human movement as it relates to barefoot science, foot-to-the-core integration, and sensory integration. Dr. Emily is actively involved in barefoot training research and barefoot education as it relates to athletic performance, injury prevention, and movement longevity. Dr. Emily has presented her research in barefoot education both nationally and internationally to over 20,000 professionals. With her Barefoot Training Specialist Program in over 40 countries worldwide and translated into 15 languages. In today's conversation, we talk about how Dr. Emily looks at feet in relation to functional anatomy, barefoot science, our relationship to gravity from a medical view, power plates and our body's response, what is Naboso and how it works, hearing and balance relations, and her personal COVID story as a long hauler. So with that, let's begin our talk.
Dr. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. I would love to hear a little bit more about how you became a podiatrist and the early stories that got you there.
Absolutely. So first off, thank you guys so much for having me be on the show and to share a little bit about how I look at the human body, feet, obviously, fascia, just this kind of very sensory rich environment that we live within. My background is I'm a podiatrist, I am a clinician, but I consider myself more of a functional podiatrist, meaning that I'm probably unlike almost every other podiatrist. I don't look at the feet from an isolated perspective. I think the feet are just part of the bigger picture, which is movement as a podiatrist. I'm also a human movement specialist, and I've been in the fitness industry for over 20 years. So I actually started in the fitness industry, and then shortly on after being in fitness, I went to podiatry school, but the entire time that I was going through podiatry, I was applying the concepts of feet to fitness. This is now, oh my gosh, almost 20 years ago. And the further that I got along, I kept seeing this disconnect between what I appreciated in fitness and then what I was being taught in podiatric medical school. So once I graduated podiatry school, I actually took a break from residency, went back to school, got my master's in human movement. And in the master's in human movement, I studied barefoot science, fascia, integrated concepts with the diaphragm and pelvic floor and all of that. And that really is the glue in between fitness podiatry is my master's. And then that shaped how I look at the human body, barefoot science, breath, pelvic floor, super integrated. And now I travel around the world teaching other professionals how I look at the human body.
Wow.
He's exhausted.
Yeah. No, I had heard that before, and I just think that's such a yummy journey, especially for being someone interested in the human body, that you've gotten a really beautiful balance of the more medical point of view and then human performance and be able to integrate that. I mean, it's no wonder that you have this great platform of all the different offerings that you bring to the world. I'm definitely a consumer of a handful of your programs. And why I was so interested in having you come on is it really does speak to the language of structural integrators and also, somatic movement practitioners. And it's just really fun to learn from a doctor who is holding this greater spectrum and not just an isolated, like, yes, you're trained in podiatry, but it's not just isolated to the foot. Clearly the foot is the foundation of our body. What's happening into our feet is most likely going to be transmitting up the body in some way. And that you're really holding all that, because I think you've probably seen it with your patients, is being able to, they may come in with a problem, that you're taking a holistic approach. And often, I don't want to throw a blanket statement, but it kind of is, we don't get seen as a whole person. We only get seen as what our chief complaint is. And when you get to be seen as a whole person, you get motivated to maybe be a participant in being healed and not just, doctor, tell me what to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated in functional medicine, integrative medicine. That's actually the trend within the medical community right now, or at least it is in the world that I am, like anti-aging medicine and biohacking. And there's kind of this space of, there's so much more that we can do versus symptom-based medicine, which is a traditional Western medicine approach that is super subspecialized. You go to the orthopedic surgeon that specializes in your knee, and he can't look at or ask questions of anything beyond just your knee. That's a very Western medicine approach. With podiatry, people may be surprised that I'm able to take a profession or a specialty such as podiatry and apply it with a functional medicine approach. And I remember years ago when I was still in podiatry school, I used to go to anti-aging medicine conferences, and it's through an organization called A4M. Their conferences are incredible. But A4M, and I would go as a podiatry student, and all the other MD docs would be like, why are you here? Like, you're a podiatrist. You are so far away from this functional medicine spectrum. And I was like, no, your presentation about your skin, like anti-aging skin and how to keep your collagen in your face to look young, I can apply that as a podiatrist to movement and the collagen of your body and in your fascia, because it's the same collagen. And I want to protect your collagen of your fascia and your tendons and your connective tissue so you can have movement longevity. I'm now an anti-aging specialist. I just focus on movement. So that's always how I've applied it. And now I've really kind of opened up that area in, let's say, podiatry specifically, about what functional podiatry would be.
That's great. Can you speak a little bit? I feel like this is a newer webinar, but correct me if I'm wrong. And if it's free, I feel like it was. The gravity in the human movement?
Yes, so I did a webinar through EBFA Global, which is our education company, and it was about gravity, friend or foe. So what's our relationship to gravity? And I look at gravity as a necessary sensory stimulus to the body or to the nervous system, and that even before we're born, when we're in utero, we are developing our relationship to gravity, and which just shows how important it is that we're trying to orientate ourselves to gravity and strengthen the muscles and the nervous system that controls gravity orientation before we're even born. And then obviously as we go from lying to sitting to crawling to walking, essentially you're just learning to navigate your body and gravity through what a lot of people will reference as center of gravity, right? Your balance, but it's not that simple. It's actually much more. Gravity is weight, it's proprioceptive. So it connects you to your body awareness. So I use gravity as a trick or a hack to build body awareness for a child, for an athlete, for someone who had maybe a stroke or a movement disorder. And you can do that by using like weighted vests or wrist weights. If you're in water, you actually get higher proprioceptive awareness of your body because it's pressure on your proprioceptive system, the skin. And then that helps people orientate their body in space. So I'm fascinated by gravity, partly because of just loving the sensory system, but it's a lot of the patients that I see is, let's say if we just think of like fall reduction as one example, people who are at a fall risk, let's say I'm 75, I had a stroke, or I have inner ear, I have hearing loss on one side, whatever it is, I've lost my relationship to gravity, my body awareness. I actually lose a sense of myself, which can actually go in several ways. It could be the physical self or like my internal self, which both of those fascinate me as people get older. And what can we do from a sensory gravity awareness perspective to build both body awareness so they don't fall, but self-awareness so they stay confident? Because a fear of falling or a lack of movement confidence is a huge contributor to falls that I think is underappreciated.
Right. That's why I kind of led into that when you were talking about the anti-aging conferences that you go to. And recently listening to that webinar, of course, I was drawn to it because Dr. Ida Rolf, her whole thing was helping bodies, getting them better in line in relationship to gravity. So just, again, how does the modern body still stay upright with this gravitational force? But also it's a reminder too of how our aging bodies start to suffer with gravity. And I really liked what you offered with the ankle weights. I presented that to a client of mine who is in their mid-70s and is always kind of finding themselves in space is just a challenge. Their proprioception is not well tuned in that way. And I encourage them to buy little bangles. And I think Bali made they're kind of fashionable ones. And so I was like, put these on your feet, because this person just had a knee replacement and is really struggling. Walking again wasn't like an easy task. And I was like, put these on your feet. There's enough stimulus where it's not overwhelming, but will remind you to pay attention to picking up your legs and finding a proper placement. And it's helped a little bit. I think for this particular individual, it's still kind of a challenge of finding orientation in space, which is, I don't know how far that is particular aging or just not really being well in tune with that. Sounds historically it's not a strong sense for her. But yeah, I think that the whole relationship of being in balance with gravity is key, especially in our modern ways of life. And I see it with my poor kid, we're homeschooling by COVID choice. And I, sitting at the computer and with the tablets and he's 6. And even sometimes with my 3-year-old too, just kind of seeing them start to shrink into that anterior line. And so doing the best I can to keep them with sound structure, with gravity as long as they can.
Well, I mean, that's why movement is so important, because, when you move, most likely you're vertical, like up in gravity. So it gets people into that sensory stimulus. And I think that there's a huge connection between, yes, movement and say cognitive, emotional, just brain optimization. Part of it is just the fact that you're moving your limbs and you're getting blood flow going. But I do think that a lot of it is this gravitational sensory stimulus. And what I go into in the webinar that I didn't mention yet is that gravity by your body is perceived as weight or pressure, right? You feel gravity. You don't consciously feel it, but you feel it. And then gravity to the foot is vibrations through ground reaction forces. So both pressure to your body and your joints and things like that, the weight, stimulates your brain and your nervous system. And then every time you take a step, the vibrations of your foot hitting the ground stimulates your nervous system. And your foot is sensitive to vibration, but your entire myofascial web is sensitive to vibration. Every cell in your body vibrates. That's how it communicates. So I'm very fascinated by vibrations and just that aspect of vibration being kind kind of like the life force of the human body. And if that's how, the oldest part of your body, which are the cells, all the way down to like bacteria, and if they're vibrating, I mean, that's clearly a innate communication or sensory stimulus to your body. And just by moving and picking up your feet and bringing in vibrations is so important.
What are your thoughts about power plates?
Well, I almost said that as you asked that. So I love whole body vibration platforms. PowerPlate is one. Galileo is another one. So we have quite a few people through Naboso, which is another one of my companies, that use various different types of vibration platforms. One of them is PowerPlate that you mentioned, which is vibrations that oscillate vertical and horizontal, that kind of try to hit this triplanar vibration. Galileo is a more kind of like this type of motion, like it's alternating vibrations, and they stimulate the nervous system completely different. Some people get a heightened response to them. I've actually been on whole body vibration platforms where they're almost too stimulating, and I suddenly was overcome by it was really a sympathetic response, but it was going, and then something triggered in my body, and I was just like, and then like my palms sweat, and I clearly went into and I was like, okay, I'm off, I'm done, right? And then I was nauseous for a while. We shouldn't always just base vibration off of what we think is the best one, because some of our clients are going to respond a little bit differently to them. And then some, it's going to be too much. So you have to really baby step on them versus you say, okay, here we're going to do 5 minutes because that's kind of the standard dose. And then you could be 30 seconds in and your client just shuts down because it freaks them out. It shakes it. It puts them in a survival state, and then you're not going to get any benefit. You actually have to then get them out of that and then go with the rest of your session.
Yeah, I have a client who has Galileo, which looks less vibration wise. I've always been curious about it, but these power plates, there's something about it that made me feel like, because I've had some past experiences that have been maybe traumatizing, of which the sympathetic chain kicks up and it's like that shaking going on, of which, so I've always been like, I've steered clear of it because I could see it being helpful maybe, but also being severely not helpful, especially if people are not as in tuned into their autonomic nervous system. It's like they could be continuing harm and harm and harm. But I know nothing about the Galileo. When you said it, it like reminded me that it looks like it's part balance, part shaking. Is that the deal?
Yep. Yeah, and it's an alternating. Actually, some of the research around the Galileo is actually a little bit better or stronger, let's say, as far as what it does to the nervous system. Where we do see a really good response, though, for those that, let's say, are open to the vibration or you do it appropriately, is if we take children with autism as an example, and let's say they're sensory seeking type of a spectrum, and you put them on a power plate or something like that, it calms them down and they actually center, focus, could actually learn better. And that's how we use the Naboso products as well, is that we're actually in some schools and the kids will be stimulated on them if they're getting a little bit too riled up. It'll center them back down so that they can focus. So it is quite interesting. I think it depends if people are sensory seeking, sensory defensive, what their relationship is to sensory. Thankfully, most people are more sensory seeking than defensive.
So you're saying that everyone is different.
Everyone is different.
So the power plate was my COVID purchase, and I love it. So, because with not being able to go to the gym, it's not always something I always did, but I definitely liked jumping on it and like doing squats or, various things. And I don't know, the way the internet works, it somehow like it can tap into your brain, be like, oh, you remember that thing you missed? Here it is. And so some special came up on this was a home version, so it doesn't have the handle and it's small.
Yep.
And it's interesting because I like it, but I kind of stay, unless I'm doing kind of hit workouts on it and kind of just bouncing on and off of it, I'll put it on the highest setting. But for the most part, I do keep it on the lower one, especially if you stand completely upright. It feels like it really shakes up into my brain.
Well, so that's where people need to know how our body actually responds to vibrations. And the body responds to vibrations by creating isometric contractions to brace it and splint it into it. That if someone is using a whole body vibration platform and you're all the way vertical and you're not kind of contracting down into the vibration, you are technically not using it the right way, which is not to the fault of the end user because they don't know, right? But for the practitioner to know that we damp vibrations by contracting into the vibration, then you actually use the vibration in the way that it should be stimulating the body. And that's important for really for the practitioner to know, is that dynamic movement is built around isometric contractions, and then what's actually moving when you move is the fascia, and it's not the muscle itself. The muscle kind of sits and hangs on. You're kind of trying to mimic that with some of these vibration platforms.
It's interesting. So it sounds like my nervous system or my body knew that that was not the appropriate place to be, because I never go there. I am curious. So of course, it's a new thing in the house and my kids love it, but I only will let them sit on it. I don't let them stand vertically for the fact that what I've experienced myself. And I got a little nervous. And of course I went looking and through the internet, and they said that power plates, there are some negative responses to it, saying that maybe it causes brain damage.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I thought that was a far stretch.
Be scared of your children on it.
That's the internet that causes brain damage.
Yeah, exactly. So they actually use whole body vibration with children who have cerebral palsy and brain injury or hypertonic children. So it's absolutely safe for a child to use it. The way that I would use it though with the child is more like, oh, it's a massage, and then they put their legs on it, kind of what you're saying. Or, can you step on it and off of it right away? So they're kind of walking over it, because I know the one that you have is kind of like an aerobic step one, that they could step on it and off of it. Don't just stand there and just stay there. So I agree with you on that. But yes, definitely safe from the perspective of, even if they're sitting on a chair and their feet are on it and it's vibrating and it's kind of tickling the feet, is probably what they would say that it tickles. That's how it's used in neurological conditions in all ages, all types, but specifically with CP children.
Great, thank you. Which now I want to put my Naboso mats on it. I didn't think of that.
Nicole, we actually make a Naboso power plate mat for the version that you have, the personal power plate.
All right.
No excuse now.
Ding.
Can you talk a little bit about Naboso? Because I've heard of it a little bit, but not a lot. So it'd be nice to share, so that also the people listening can be like, that's the third time I've heard that word. What is that?
Yes. So Naboso is a company that I started 3 years ago, and it is a material that I developed that is uniquely designed to stimulate the nerves in the feet and the hand. And the design on the material that all of our products have is like Braille. So people are seeing that there's little dots or pyramids across the entire material. The best analogy to our product line, our material, is Braille. So how the Braille dots are, separated, they're a certain height and their distance. When you touch a Braille dot, what you're really stimulating is what's called 2-point discrimination, right? So can you discriminate or differentiate those 2 points and feel that it's 2 points, it's not one, right? The sensitivity of it. And so that's a pattern. It is loosely called texture, but texture, people think like, oh, my carpet has a texture, the AstroTurf has a texture, the rocks out there have a texture. That's not really what is happening to the brain. It's the ability to differentiate 2 points. That's the pattern of the texture, like Braille, that when you stimulate it on the hands and feet, it tells the somatosensory cortex, or the brain, about that input, where the feet are in space, where the body is in space. And then that translates to balance, posture, gait, foot awareness, body awareness, strength, force, etc. So through Naboso and this material, we have developed insoles that we use for all applications, including children. We have mats. So picture a yoga mat size, and it has this pyramid or like braille across the entire surface. And then we have flooring, and we license our material to different companies. It's on a treadmill, it's on a force plate, it's on a shoe, it's on a balance mat. So all these different things. And the end goal is to help people tap into their nervous system through the skin and the feet, because the skin and the feet is so powerful to how the brain controls movement. So of course it's going to have medical applications. Think of someone who had a stroke, but it also has an application for athletes, professional athletes, all athletes. And then it has application, one of ours that is really interesting, it has a wellness slash, we'll call it corporate wellness, that we actually use it for people who stand on their feet all day for work. So that could be like a trainer, that could be a body worker, that could be, right, anyone who's literally on their feet. We happen to do a study with Stanley Black & Decker, the manufacturing facility. So they're obviously on concrete 10 hours a day manufacturing things. And we saw a 93% reduction in foot pain using our insoles on people who have to stand on concrete for work. So it was really impressive stuff. And we have other products that are coming out and blah, 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 all that fun stuff.
I have a question then about that, which is going to tie into what you were talking about earlier. So interestingly, like a week ago, my dad was walking. My dad's in his mid-70s and sort of missed a curb, fell, broke some ribs, which is pretty bad. But my dad's wonderful, but he has very little sensory awareness, even when we do body work. And he wears these shoes with these huge foam, of which I'm like, and I was thinking to myself was, if I got him on barefoot, that at least he could start to develop better proprioception, but he won't go that way. And part of what you were saying that actually was really interesting before was he's been going deaf for a while, and I never put the two together about losing that and that. So when you're speaking now about this, I'm wondering, like, in your view, without shamelessly promoting yourself, like getting your insoles and putting the insoles in the feet and having that would ideally be a possibility for increasing his own sensory motor awareness and maybe helping with walking, among other stuff.
100%. So there's a few things that I will say in response to that. One is that, yes, the most ideal situation would be having someone in not so much cushion. We know that, like, you need to feel the ground. Everyone who's listening probably appreciates that. That's why minimal shoes are so popular. But the people that actually support minimal shoes and are like drank the Kool-Aid on that is actually very small compared to the actual population of the world, let's say, right, or the US, or wherever you want to have your perspective. It's a really small pocket. If you're in the pocket, you feel like everyone is there, so it seems bigger than it is. But a lot of people either don't understand it, they're not going to switch their shoes. That's not the reality of the masses. So that means, for your father as an example, he's like, no inhale, Andrew, am I getting out of these shoes? So nice try. And you say, not a problem. You stay in your cushioned shoes, and I'm going to put Naboso in, which will stimulate your feet, kind of like your minimal or barefoot, so that you have increased awareness, because the cushion in your shoes is taking away all of that important sensory stimulation. So let's find this middle ground that makes you happy and makes him happy and actually benefits his balance and his motor control. The second thing that I would say to that is definitely the losing of the hearing is a huge contributor. And conceptually, we know that, but until you actually see a lot of it, you don't realize the impact. So we did a study for Naboso, and we went to these various long-term care centers, and we had them using our insoles. So I had a good perspective of seeing people 70 plus trying to reduce their falls. And what I did notice is people 70 plus have a marked loss in body awareness, which is a market. And then you add increased body weight. So now you have a mass. And I'm not saying that your dad will be older, but or heavier. But, as people become older, they become maybe less active, or the hormones change and whatever, they start putting on weight. It's just part of growing older. And so you have a larger mass, and then you have an altered sense of that mass, and then the reactivity of the nervous system is slower, and then you have certain things that contribute to a loss of that perception, that is very hard to reduce falls in that population per se. So it really gave an interesting perspective of fall risk in, let's say, really 75 plus. That's where you see most of the changes. People can kind of stay really until like 75, and something starts to happen when you start to push around, let's say, even that 80 mark, plus or minus some. That for your father, and as people get older, this is something I say in my workshops, is that we can only perceive, or we're only as stable as the rate at which we perceive a shift in that body, right? So if I can't sense myself fast enough, I won't be stable. So trying to control like muscle strength, a lot of senior programming is build muscles, like get out of the chair, get your quads strong. But if they have strong muscles, but they don't have an awareness of their body and space, they might as well not have strong muscles. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say? So that's why I keep going back to sensory, gravity, weights, wrist weights, weighted vest, Naboso insoles, minimal shoes, things that helps that individual build body awareness. Maybe even like pool work, how all the seniors go to the YMCA and then they go and they do the pool, and it's all the old ladies who are in this. It's like totally stereotypical, but that's how people kind of think of like swimming exercise, is like the older ladies going to the YMCA. That's one of the best things they could be doing, because I had mentioned earlier, water builds body awareness because you actually feel your body in the pool. So yeah, that's a total long answer to Andrew. Yes, your dad should use the insole.
Well, that lends to maybe another topic, but can tie in that, another thing I've heard you talk about is the biopsychosocial model. And as you're explaining that, I'm thinking of, I've been hearing it through my folks and their friends, and there's kind of like, when you reach this senior citizen age, it's almost like this permission of like, oh, I'm older, this is my destiny, and not really in the kind of the medical world kind of catering to that, or maybe marketing it from those thick sole shoes. And it's hard to challenge that, I think, a little bit, because I think too, when you're getting older, there's a lot more to think about in this whole risk of falling. And as Andrew kind of pointed out, stumbling over a curb isn't just a little sprain. You could really shatter some bones. And so there's so much in the story that's created as we get to this, our older age. And hopefully we can start shifting that a little bit. We're still young enough, and great products like that you're creating can bring back to, it's not about, of course, having strength is great. But yeah, what good is strength if you're not aware of who you are, what world you're living in, and your relationship to sensation?
Yeah, because of Naboso, I go to a lot of aged care industry conferences, like the business of aging, we'll call it. And I know maybe you're like, oh my gosh, this whole podcast became a aging topic. This applies to everyone because everyone will get older, but really
exactly, we're all aging, and we're in the nature of our work is preventative medicine.
Yes, exactly.
So,
yeah.
We're all, especially in COVID, we've all aged years in just weeks. Exactly. So it's okay.
I know. Yes, I definitely have. But when you look at the business of aging in the US is very different than the business of aging in other countries, which is very fascinating. If you look at, say, Japan, where we do Naboso work, I'm actually partnership with Power Play in Japan. So I've been there and I understand their business of aging model by the government and just culturally, that they value and respect them and give them this purpose as they are older so much longer. Unfortunately, here in the US, we kind of like, you go in the nursing home, like I have all this stuff to do, like the people don't live at home with their children and then it kind of stays generational like that. That's just not really how our culture is built around, which means that a lot of these individuals then get shunted to a nursing home where they don't really have a purpose. So then they're not being stimulated, and then maybe they're isolated, and that affects their mood, and then they become depressed. And then when you're depressed, you kind of disassociate from your body. So now you don't have body awareness, and now you have a heightened fall risk. So it becomes this whole like downward spiral in a sense, that the way that when I go to a aged care conference and I speak to it of we need sensory and movement for people who are older. And the more that you can keep those two things, you keep their mood elevated, so you decrease depression rates in seniors, quality of life rates in seniors. And then from a mental perspective, you maintain blood flow to the brain because they're moving and you're stimulating them. So you bring in sensory. So they maintain cognitive performance, you reduce dementia risks, Alzheimer's risks. So those two connections, and then you maintain independence, which is huge. You had mentioned a little bit of kind of the biopsychosocial and maybe the relationships with the doctors. One thing that I've also found with older patients, and maybe those that are listening know that their older clients require a little bit more time because they want to talk longer. So they're kind of lonely, which goes back to this independence isolation side of things. They want to be stimulated. They want stimulated conversations, or they might say, oh, I have pain here. And you're like, oh, it's not matching the way that it's presenting, right? But they're just like, no, trust me, like it hurts here. And you're like, like they're just older, they're just kind of like, da, da, da. It doesn't really hurt, right? That we kind of like undermine their ability to perceive that something hurts them or that they're stiff. And I get it. I've totally been guilty of it with podiatrists, that they're just like, no, my shoe hurts now. What did you do to my foot? Like, I can't wear my shoe. I can't leave. This is driving me crazy. What did you do to my foot? And a whole thing comes up, and I'm just like, I didn't do anything. And then you just like touch it. Okay, now try it. Okay, that's better. You're like the kind of, so it's an interesting kind of dichotomy with the older clients or patients, or as we age. But I do think that the more that people stay in touch with themselves, and sensory and movement, all of that stuff has a trickle-down effect on their emotional state, their cognitive state, their independence. So it's a really important topic.
Well, and pain is so complex. I mean, it is. I mean, we see it too in the nature of our work, is people come in with whatever their chief complaint is, but we're seeing, in looking at their alignment, their shoulder hurts, but we can see the imbalance in their hip, and then maybe driven from the way the feet are organized. And especially if we're doing a 10 or the classic recipe of the 10 series, they're like, it's my shoulder hurts. Why are you working on my feet? Or it's my shoulder hurts. Why are we talking about my breath? Oh, well, maybe because your shoulders rest on your rib cage. Like it is. And then, people can be identified to pain, and it's the way they get seen, and to tell someone.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. So in my office, I see primarily movement disorders, chronic pain, and chronic connective tissue issues, meaning like partial tears of tissues, and I do stem cells and regenerative medicine for them. So those are kind of the three main things that I see. For those that have chronic pain, most of it is going to be, I think, like neuralgias in a sense, right? Maybe it's an entrapped nerve, maybe it's a nerve that was injured from a myriad of different issues. It's a neuropathy, it's an RSD, it's something that is neuropathic in nature to some degree. And a lot of them do become identified by their pain. Like, my name is Dr. Emily and I have pain that like, that's me, it's almost like validating to the ego for people who read a lot on like ego, is you hold on to identities because it just reinforces your ego, and your ego likes you to hold on those, which is pain. So if you're trying to get them out of pain, and that's such a strong identity of who they are, it can make your job as the clinician or the practitioner, the body worker, the healer, to try to help them go through the next door. If they are not refusing to release things to get through the door, then you're just like, well, my hands are tied, so what am I going to do? That's hard, and I do agree pain is difficult.
I had a client I was working with who was Scandinavian, and we like kept getting to this place and we couldn't go any further. And I remember I asked him, I was like, when was the last time you cried? And he was like, I'm a Viking, we don't show pain. And I was like, we're done here. Like, there's nothing I can do. You're like, you've hit this wall. You won't actually let go. Like, we can be friends, but I can't actually do anything anymore. You know, that's your identity. I can hold the pain of the world.
Yeah. I mean, it really is fascinating. But then when people, I mean, and sometimes it's sad because you will like them as a person, you treated them for a while, or this could even be like a family member, or just, you know, someone that you love in whatever context. And you know that there is, if you've been here, which I have been on the other side, and then when you get to the enlightened side, or whatever you want to call it, right? I let myself cry, and then, which is scary. It's very scary to unleash certain things. But then when you're on the other side, you're like, holy hell, how did I not do this before? Had I known that it would be like this amazing, then I would have done that so much sooner. So like in his case, it's unfortunate because you could be like such a great person, and I want him to know what it feels like to be on this side, but there's nothing you can do because it's ultimately his choice.
Right.
Well, to speak of someone who I think has been a great advocate of not staying stuck in a story, I've followed you, for a lot of reasons on social media, but I've really been admired how you've managed COVID.
Oh, goodness.
If you don't mind, if we could just touch in on that, because I think when you first, you came out with vulnerability, and then you kind of shared the experience, and then also not only the vulnerability, I personally reached out to you when you're like, is anybody who's experienced this? I'm on my way to the hospital. Yeah. And then you came out of it and you're like, mask, we need them, and pulled your resources and had the mask mission. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Which I was a recipient of that. And then would you identify yourself as a long hauler? Still?
Very much so. So I have really bad brain fog that is it's subjective, where like pain is subjective. So if people haven't had a certain type of pain, or maybe never have pain, lucky them, or chronic pain, brain fog is something that it's so subjective, and it's different for everyone. So if you've never experienced every single day being this fuzzy, disconnected, hell that you're in, that it feels almost like I'm over here watching myself versus like in my body. So it kind of felt like I'm detached, which is very hard to be productive. And I at least have a very good drive to kind of push through it. But the part that's actually struggled the most is my creativity, because it's very hard to be creative and write and do things when your brain is fuzzy. But then a big part of brain inflammation, and I actually have a lot of toxins that I'm going through also, that I think it was like a perfect storm. So I have mold, I have pesticides, I have like literally everything just kind of culminated. And it probably was low grade, and then COVID just was like, boop, and then everything fell down. So the toxicities, and probably COVID as well, puts your body, it affects the vagus nerve, your limbic system, it puts you in fight or flight. That I've had since COVID personality changes, not like, now I'm like, don't be scared. but more so where you get just really impatient, right? And that's what, when you look at certain other brain changes, like a chemo brain, HIV, which is a virus-induced brain changes, MS, other EBV or CMV, Epstein-Barr, those ones that people actually say that there's personality changes that come with it, that the person is very impatient, short-fused. And that's because these conditions affect the limbic system, your vagus nerve, the amygdala, like all that stuff. And then the same thing with toxicities. So it's really hard to essentially deal with the fuzzy brain, but then my body is in this fight or flight response because of all of the inflammation and toxicity. So I'm doing literally everything possible that I can in like a day while still running several companies and raising my baby. But yeah, like I'm even going to do in September a 5-day retreat. Now that I'm in Arizona, I'm going to Sedona, and I'm going to do like a spiritual retreat. Because I'm like, I just need to do, I'm doing a detox of everything, but I haven't detoxed specifically like the spiritual, emotional side of things. You know, I can do so many whole body cryotherapy sessions, which builds a vagal tone and things like that. But is that necessarily changing the mental, spiritual conversation of being in fight or flight? Like, I feel like you could, what would it be, conceptually or intellectually train your vagus nerve, but are you doing it from a deeper perspective? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You're like,
totally.
you're detoxifying from the trauma of being,
Yeah.
I mean, catching the, especially you're in New York. So witnessing all of what's going on in New York. And then, I mean, that makes 100%. And Sedona is beautiful. So
Yeah.
I think you'll
excited for that.
greatly enrich.
My husband and baby. But yeah, I mean, COVID put me in such a fight or flight state. This is before I even had it. It was like beginning of March, and I was like, like I have companies, I have patients, I have like my family, is the world gonna end? Like I just had a whole like, and everyone responds to it different. Some people were just probably eating potato chips and watching reruns and like, whatever, it's fine. But I was thinking of like global humanity, depression, my mind goes. So I had such bad, I started putting myself in like almost like panic attacks from it, and insomnia because it was just a state of uncertainty. Of course, then I get COVID and that whole thing. And then right then I had post-COVID effects, so that kept me in it, and that's where I am today. But before that, which is funny that we don't even realize, is that whatever you had going on before this just continued into it. So if you had any other stressor in your life, this just completely compounded it. And I was new mom. My baby was 6 months old when all this happened. So I was still kind of navigating like life as a mom and getting past some like crazy birth trauma that I had. And then so I was like, whoa, and then I'm just like, whoa, throwing on top of it. So I was just like, what the hell is going on in this? Like, this last year is just like, you know, nuts. I need Sedona.
Yeah. So am I correct in what I've been following and reading with you that you're treating some of the brain dysfunction and fog through your gut? You're really tying in the gut brain connection.
Yes. So I had a GI test that looked at my gut biome, looked to see if I had leaky gut, which I knew that I did. I didn't even have to have a test to do that, but it was pretty much obliterated. And then there's a test that you can do for a marker that when it's high, it essentially confirms that you have leaky blood-brain barrier. And that was high. So again, I didn't need to have a test to know it, but just you quantify it. So then that means that there's brain inflammation, there's potentially viral particles. But since I also had pesticides and 3 other environmental toxins and mold, that potentially was just like, okay, we're going to open the gates and then you can go in there. And then it became a little rigmarole. So strengthening the blood-brain barrier through strengthening the gut. And then I'm doing a ton of detox. I'm doing infrared sauna 3 times a week. When I'm not doing infrared sauna, I'm doing a clay bath at home to just sweat it out, binders. I'm doing hyperbaric oxygen, which is something I just added, and that's been really beneficial. I did ozone when I was in New York still. I did that after I had COVID. And then IV infusions, and then a butt ton of vitamins. And then I'm going to do my Sedona detox.
Sounds like you have the life. I mean, everyone should have COVID just to get the spot treatments
I'm
they
at
have
the
afterwards.
spa all the time. Yeah, no, I wish that it, I wish. It's a full-time job trying to keep your health in check. And, you know, a lot of these things, which is unfortunate, are not covered by insurance, which always bothers me, that side of things, because you have people who might not have access to them, but they should. Like, it's not fair that someone who can pay for a hyperbaric medicine can do it where someone else really needs it and the insurances aren't reimbursing for things like this. So that's kind of a perspective I get into this, of having now a chronic condition. I can empathize with my patients who have chronic conditions, of the emotional frustration of it. And I'm sure people who are listening have patients who have chronic conditions, whether it's MS, Parkinson's, whatever it might be, and that the emotional side that they bring into it is such a huge effect. And it's something that has to be honored by the doctor or the practitioner. That just kind of like, imagine if every day you had to start over and have this like reminder that you are not how you used to be. How you've got to be like a mental warrior for that to not start to affect you day after day. And I used to see that with my neuropathy patients, especially idiopathic neuropathy. Those are some of the hardest emotionally to deal with, because they're usually young, healthy, and seemingly out of nowhere they get this kind of an autoimmune attack to their peripheral nerves. And now one day they feel fine, next day every shoe and sock bothers them, the next day it's burning, the next day they have this, then they feel great, so they think they're good, and then they go back down to zero, and then it's just this whole emotional thing. And, you know, for those patients, I usually just sit down and listen to them. Usually that just has to be a session. Let down and just listen to them, because they just want someone to hear them and not think that they're crazy. And then when you actually hear them and actually listen to them, then they feel this sense of like connection. Okay, now let's see what we can do for you. So I know we had mentioned it earlier, but chronic pain individuals are just wanting to be heard is step one. They just want to be heard. And I try to do that following the biopsychosocial model, that people just want to be heard, is step one.
Absolutely. And I think, yes, of course, you wonderful that you had all that accessible to you to try to rid yourself of the virus. But it's also, and it is a shame that the medical insurance industry is so limiting in so many ways for people to seek proper treatment. But with you sharing that definitely helps people who are listeners who maybe are suffering from COVID or know somebody, that there are alternative options that I think, speaking to just the plain trauma of it, of working through that could help with symptoms. Clay, I mean, get a good, well-resourced charcoal clay. That shouldn't be overly expensive. Being able to try to find, I mean, maybe that's a little hard these days with infrared saunas, but that there's a reminder that there are a lot of other options out there to help with this particular, we're talking about COVID, but with any ailment, that we get fixated on what the Western medicine has to offer, which I'm a big believer in it. I have a quadriplegic brother that if it weren't for Western medicine, he wouldn't be with us today. But there are also so many other ways that we can take care of ourselves, and just a reminder that there's a lot of ways out there. And I think you offered some really great options that could be affordable for people if they're still suffering from long haul or a hauler. I think that's what it's called. Mm-hmm. And I read something today. There's this new, it's circulating with social media about how this big mega machine was able to study COVID, but it was very long-winded, and I had a hard time reading it with my little ones running around. But at the very end, when I got to, they were like, it's vitamin D. Everybody still needs vitamin D. Everybody's pretty lacking in it. Just a reminder that that's and it's an over-the-counter, not overly expensive medicine.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is that everyone likes to send those to me, which is nice that they think of me. When they think COVID, they're like, oh, Dr. Emily. Let me just send new research to Dr. Emily. But for those who have had COVID, the whole like, this is how it works, and this is how it just messes up your body, and this is the mechanism of action, doesn't matter to me anymore. So I'm just kind of like, that's good. I had it, and I'm in this like daily hell of brain fog. So I do appreciate that they send it to me, but I'm also like, that's not going to help me right now. So of anyone who's listening that is potentially a long hauler, it's really that side that isn't being studied right now as much, because we need to control the virus first. So that's like step one, right? Like, how do we control it? Where's the vaccine? What's its mechanism of action so that we can squash it? And then all of our attention can turn to everyone who had it and is having these long hauling symptoms. But until then, all of the millions of people that are in there are kind of at their own kind of devices to try to figure out what to do. And I hope that people are not just like, I'll get over it eventually, like in time, right? My body will get stronger every day. That's not how I am. I'm going to be like, I'm not going to wait to see if like, because it's already been 5 months and I'm still the exact same from a symptoms perspective. So if I'm just like, well, let's see, especially with the nervous system, imagine like a TBI or someone who has a concussion. Like normally you are on that so aggressively. From, if you just think of like hyperbaric medicine, if someone has a TBI or a concussion, they're like, get in the tank right now, because the brain needs to like get on that shit right away. And people who may have neurological symptoms post-COVID and they're just kind of dilly-dallying around it because they just don't know and they're not being directed by their Western medicine doctor, I pray that they don't have persistent symptoms because they didn't act soon enough. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
So like on that sort of note, it sounds like you've been posting about it and sharing about it. How would people find you and what you've been writing?
So some people think that it is not COVID related, which is always interesting. They're like, COVID didn't really even happen. And I'm just like, okay, that's not a conversation that I'm wanting to have. But I feel that a lot of people are open to hear those things, and they might have a family member or a loved one who has, and they want to just know what options exist, because again, it doesn't know. And that's why I do post things, to try to be a resource, not as an expert in any way, but to provide some insight in what I'm experiencing, what I'm doing. Like I just did a video for Dr. Oz, and some people may like him or his show or whatever with it, but the fact that Dr. Oz is doing a show on brain fog post-COVID, to me is so great, because that's just bringing attention to these people who are experiencing certain symptoms and just kind of validating them a little bit, and then giving them a platform to have a voice, which I think is great.
Well, and it's like you said as well, I think that just being recognized. So if someone's going through something and they read your post, it's also a sense of like, oh, I'm not alone. I can do this. So for people who do want to hear that, and or barefoot or any sort of other things that you're talking about, where do people find Dr. E?
Yes. So my Instagram is at Dr. Emily DPM. So people can follow me on there. I do a lot of posts and stories and IGTVs. And then my education company, which is EBFA Global. That's the website, ebfaglobal.com. That links to our YouTube, to our social handles, to our online courses. Nicole had mentioned that we do free webinars, free courses. We also have paid courses. We have live courses that we actually have a couple that are coming up in 2020 still that are in person. So we have one in Arizona, one in Chicago. So if people are looking for that. We do a few via Zoom. Otherwise, they're sitting on our online platform. And then for Naboso, which is the sensory insoles and mats, that is naboso.com, naboso.com. And then that links to our social and YouTube and things like that. I don't hide from people. You can find me.
So you're clearly a wealth of amazing information and a great resource for so many things. A closing question is, what inspires you to be in this field? And to be an innovator and to share so freely?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And it took me a while to figure out what it was, where it's just kind of like, what is your purpose, is what people could feel. And then they're in a job and they're kind of like, well, I'm not satisfied, and they can't find the sticky thing that just speaks to them, which I find is your true purpose and your calling on this planet. And I eventually found that mine is being a student / being an educator. So I love to learn is really what it is. And that's why I think that in the beginning, Andrew was just like, whoa, I went to 13 years of school, which is either some people are like, hell no, that's not for me, or like, whoa, that's a lot of debt in school loans. But 13 years of school, I love that environment. Which is why I love conferences, and I just go with my little coffee and my notebook, and I just love to take it in, or I read continuously. So what drives me to do what I do is that I'm curious, I love to learn, and then I love to share what I learn. So I consider my purpose to be an educator. And as a doctor, I'm not a healer, I'm an educator. I educate my patients to heal themselves. So yeah, that's what really drives me every day.
Dr. Emily, it's been so fun chatting with you. It's still virtual, even though I've seen a lot of you virtually, like on an online platform, but it's been a real pleasure to have this connection and this conversation. And thank you again for taking time to speak with us.
Of course. Thank you both so much. It was a pleasure.
And we'll see you again at some point in the future.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you both so much.
Take care of yourself.
Ciao.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks for listening to us at Touching into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about Dr. Emily at dremilysplichal.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate it if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast and subscribe to it through the platform of your choice. When you do this, it really helps other people find us, and we greatly appreciate all your support. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you on our next conversation at Touching into Presence. Bye-bye.